Hey everyone, this is Mike Wolf. Welcome to the podcast. Today's guest is one I am super excited about. It is Seth Goldman, the founder of Honest Tea, the chairman of Beyond Meat, and lots of other things. Seth is super busy, so I was excited that he had some time to catch up with me this week. We had a live conversation on Clubhouse. And as I've said before, if you want to join these conversations live, if you want to have conversations with these folks as well, come up on stage and ask questions, join our club on Clubhouse. Follow the Food Tech Live group on Clubhouse, and you can join these. We have these once or twice a week. We also have our news wrap-ups on Friday, so I encourage you to do that. But as always, we are recording these conversations so you can catch them as podcasts and listen to them as well that way. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. Let's get to it. Here's Seth Goldman. Well, I'm really excited. Let's get going. I want to thank you for joining me. And for those of you who are just joining us, I don't think that Seth Goldman really needs much of an introduction in the future food space and food innovation space. Seth, you've been at this for a long time, and I think it's safe to say you're one of the OG, better for you food entrepreneurs with Honest Tea.
Oh, I guess that's fair. Yeah. There's obviously people who've inspired me along the way, but it's certainly been growing since I got in 1998 with Honest Tea. Yeah,
1998. And you're also, a lot of people know you as chairman of the board of Beyond Meat. And so you were there, and you've also have a couple of new initiatives with Plant Burger and Eat the Change. So I want to get into all those and let's kind of really dig into what's going on as someone who thinks a lot about this. But before we do that, I maybe just spend a couple minutes talking about your journey to where you are. I mean, it's interesting. I didn't know you were early in politics and kind of your politics adjacent. Maybe you work for Senator Lloyd Bentsen. You work for Michael Dukakis. Did you have aspirations to go into politics at some point?
I did. Well, here's what I did. I had aspirations to be an activist, to act on things I cared about. And when I was growing up, and I grew up I grew up in Wellesley, Massachusetts. And so, partially because my parents were professors, I think my assumption going in was that the way to act on things you care about is to, get elected to office and then do it that way. And so business wasn't really something we in our family thought of as a career path. But I was a government major in college, and I worked on Dukakis's campaign. That's actually where I met my wife in Longview, Texas, and then I ended up being a press secretary for Lloyd Bentsen for 2.5 years. Obviously, nothing to do with any food related work. Yeah. But it was about
making the world better.
Well, it was definitely about making the world better, and it was also about communicating messages and trying to persuade people to have a certain point of view. And I think that was probably the discipline that I sharpened or honed a bit, working as a press secretary. And but it wasn't activist enough for me in that I didn't feel closely connected enough to the things I cared about. I would travel with Senator Bentsen down to Texas. We got to meet people and see the work, but I always felt a few steps removed. And so I was trying to figure out how I could be more directly involved, and that's when I actually pivoted. I first worked in national service right when AmeriCorps was getting started. I ran a demonstration program for that, and then went to business school. And then in business school, I got awakened to this broader opportunity. And
by the way, you casually mentioned your parents were professors. I don't think they were just any professors. They were pretty well-known professors in their disciplines.
Wonderful. Right? Yeah. My dad was an expert on the Soviet economy, and so he was really, during the whole Cold War, he was often a talking head and an advisor to presidents, and met with Gorbachev, and then my mom was an expert on Chinese history, and so she also advised presidents there and wrote, really important and influential books about the Cultural Revolution and how communism wasn't, there was this moment in American society where they saw the Cultural Revolution and thought, they're recreating society. And she said, no, they're persecuting intellectuals. And when that happens, that's never a good thing.
Yeah. So you go back to graduate school, and that was, I think, an important turning point for you.
It really was.
And at some point, I think you co-founded Honest Tea with one of your professors, right?
Professors, yeah, Barry Nailbuff. So I was his student in the competitive strategy course. And one of the case studies we took, this was in my second year, spring, so last semester of business school, and there was a case study. It was called the Cola Wars, and it was about Coke versus Pepsi, and that's where we got into this discussion about, which is really an amazing thing, and it's changed since. But if you think in 1995, you could walk down a beverage aisle, and there are hundreds, if not thousands, of options between when you consider different can sizes, but they all had the same calorie profile.
Yeah.
And so Barry said, well, how can that be? And of course, the fact is that it wasn't that was all everyone wanted sweet drinks. We proved that was the case, but there was a risk to it, and we agreed it's worth trying, and so we stayed in touch about it. But I actually came down to Bethesda, Maryland, worked in the investment world for 2.5 years, and then eventually got enough of the itch and maybe a little bit hubris to feel like I want to try this. And as I'm sure you'll hear whenever you talk to a food entrepreneur, there's a bit of hubris and a bit of ignorance that makes them take the step. And without that combination, food businesses won't get launched.
Yeah, they're absolutely kind of necessary to go in that direction, because it's kind of crazy to think you can succeed, and the success rate isn't always super high. But I think the combination of both is important. And by the way, I have to say, like, one of my favorite things to do in grocery stores now is to go down the modern drink aisle. Like, it's an explosion of interesting drinks. And I think, you were, seminal in maybe changing that to a certain degree.
I hope it played a role. Thank you for that. I mean, I actually look, to me, the grocery store is just it's like a museum. So I literally was there within the past 15 minutes. We're spoiled. Our office has one across the street. So my wife said, "Can I pick up a lemon for dinner?" I'm like, yes. She knows I always want an excuse to walk the aisle.
You're a grocery nerd too.
I am. It is just so culturally, it's sociologically, it's just fascinating to see. And yet at the same time, it's amazing to think that, and I'll date myself a bit, but when I was growing up, there really was only one sweetness profile you could get in the store. And for that matter, when you think about the dairy case, there was only, it was basically, the big innovation for dairy was to have skim milk. That was, and you think about where it is now, where there are dozens and even hundreds of options. So it's a wild time, and a fun time, and a creative time, but also a time of impact and of opportunity. And that's unlike any moment I've lived through, at least, where you see this kind of proliferation of choices, and which I think, for the most part, are for the better.
Yeah, and we could get into some of those plant-based new alternatives, the craziness of like the Ollie's with their high valuations, certainly worth talking about. But kind of going back along your journey, after Honest Tea, or kind of during Honest Tea, at some point you got to know Ethan Brown, right? Who is the founder. He founded Beyond in 2009. It's hard to believe it's that long ago, right? Like, I
know. Well, in a sense, to me, it's actually hard to believe it was just that recently, because you think about a category that has been created so powerfully, and I think you probably saw some of the numbers where they were just talking about plant-based meat now is more than 1% of the overall meat industry and over 2.7% of retail sales. And the Beyond Burger only launched in 2016. So to think that in the past 5 years, the largest category in food, which is meat, has been transformed that profoundly is pretty amazing. But yeah, I met Ethan in 2012, and it's really neat because I know the exact day because it's my wife's birthday, and she was reading an article about this new company getting started that was going into retail. It had been doing only in food service, and now they were preparing to launch in retail. And she said, "Boy," because we'd been vegetarian for a long time, but we had been, I would say, a little disgruntled vegetarian.
Yeah.
Which meant we were never unhappy with the decision ethically, but we were often disappointed from a culinary perspective. What would it be, epicureally? Just the products didn't taste good. And she said, if this company can do what it hopes to do, make plant-based meat taste delicious, then you should help them do that.
I mean, how many people who have gone vegetarian or gone vegan, for my own personal experience, like we watch Forks Over Knives, right? And my wife, the next day I go out and go to the aisle and get all the plant-based soy alternatives, and they were hugely disappointing. I mean, this is like 10 years ago, right? And so
exactly what happened. And you would always hear about students in college. People go vegan or vegetarian in college, and then they would, I would call it regression because that implies a negative, but they would, lapse. and the reason was because the alternatives just weren't satisfying enough. And I don't have the data, but I'm willing to bet that the lapsing is far less, the rate of sort of reversion is far less, or what we call it recidivism. Recidivism rate is far less now because the options are so much better. And so, what happened, and this even happened in our family. Our oldest son, who was the first to go vegetarian, he at age 10, he went vegetarian. And then it was burger night, and he's like, he loved the taste of hamburger, so he went back to eating meat. But eventually, it stuck. And of course, now with the options being so good and so much better in terms of now we understand the environmental part of it, we understand the health benefits. That I just think there's a lot less recidivism. Yeah,
and just to kind of set the room, because we launched right into it, I'm here with Seth Goldman. Seth is the chairman of Beyond, founder of Honest Tea. And folks, we are recording this for podcast purposes. This will be published later. And after, talking with Seth for a little bit, I do want to take some questions. So if people do want to maybe later jump on stage, stick around. We'll be taking some questions with Seth. But so you met Ethan. Your wife talked about, she was interested by this article. You eventually met Ethan. And then at some point you invested in...
But it's classic, just even the way I met Ethan, I sent an email to info@beyondmeat.com, and I just said, I read about what you're doing. And there was a line in the article that basically spoke, it was a quote from Ethan saying, I envision a future where the meat case becomes the protein case, and it's not just, chicken breast and hamburgers, it's cow protein, chicken protein, and plant protein, and they're all part of the same continuum. And that spoke to me, and I said I would love to help bring that vision to life. And like any good early stage company, they were struggling, and they appreciated somebody who was willing to roll up the sleeves and help out. So I joined the board and became an investor, and initially just got on a call every Friday with Ethan and Brent Taylor, who was one of the other early founders. And then we found it helpful and productive. We shifted it to every other day. So we were speaking Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And we did that for years. And then eventually I took on that role of executive chair, and that made it even more frequent.
And I didn't know that their first product was chicken. I guess like a lot of people, my first real identification with Beyond was with the burger. Yeah. And so, and I think that's, when you guys really went mainstream to a certain degree.
That was the breakthrough product. We needed that because the vision, like as I said, was to get to the meat case, but the chicken strips just weren't good enough to get us there. And so, we spoke to buyers, and they said, this still feels like it goes in the freezer section with the other veggie products. And then when we had the burger, and I was part of many of these sales calls with Whole Foods and with Safeway, where you bring in the burger, we bring a little griddle. It's called a little griddle. We plug in the little griddle in the conference room, and they start hearing a sizzle, and then the juiciness, and they taste it, and they say, this is a burger. This can go in the meat section. And so it literally was a breakthrough product.
And I think that rolled out, 2016, 2017?
16, yep. 16 was our first. It was a Whole Foods in Boulder that it was the first to take it on, and we were hand delivering them for a while, and then our next region was Whole Foods Mid-Atlantic, where I'm based, and we brought it first to one store, and then eventually expanded.
And I'm from the tech industry where we're used to the 1.0s, the 2.0s, and so that was a new thing for food, right? Like you didn't necessarily hey, here's version 1.0, 2.0, but you guys have rolled out multiple iterations and versions, right?
And we initially resisted that terminology because it did feel too tech-oriented, but it is just no better way to help people understand that, our commitment is to keep iterating and to keep improving. And so, we've already announced we have a 3.0 that's coming out within weeks, and, I'm sure there'll be a 4 and 5 because it is what's so neat about the whole business is the cow is not evolving anymore. The cow is a stationary target. And we can keep improving on health. We can keep improving on taste, on ingredients, in terms of an ingredient panel, and obviously in environmental aspects. And so I don't think that we're ever going to reach an endpoint. And as Ethan likes to say, our R&D team has, most of them have employment for, a lifetime because there's just so much more we can keep doing.
It's the mainstreaming of that technology framing, right? I think the consumer understands that 1.0, 2.0 now. And I actually didn't know 3.0 is coming out. So you probably can't give out too much information, but you probably tasted it.
We've teased it. I've tasted it for sure. And Ethan has teased it and talked about less saturated fat being an important part of it. And we're always going to be doing, the net. I can't outline for you every next iteration, but I mean, we're going, first of all, there's five sensory aspects we have to go after, right? So that, and there have been changes to the aroma of the product. Those who remember it from 2016 will recall that, if you cooked it in your kitchen, your house had a little funky smell, and we've gotten rid of that. So we'll go after all those things, but then you go after, ingredient sourcing, and can you localize the ingredients? Can you find cost? Obviously we have a strong mission to bring the cost down as well, and so that'll happen over time.
I'm glad you bring that up. I mean, that's been a big conversation as of late in the world of plant-based, is this idea of getting to price parity. And I've watched as you guys have rolled out more production capacity over the years. I think it's been a lot of focus of what your capital has been kind of deployed to. Yeah. But I mean, how long have you been thinking about getting to that price parity point?
For sure. That's always been an aspiration. Absolutely. And Ethan has talked about the expectation to be able to underprice animal-based meat. He said a year ago, we'll be able to underprice a category of animal-based meat within 5 years. So now we're 4 years away. And one of the key steps to doing that is making what's called inline production. And so without getting into too much detail, basically we make the meat in one part of the country, we freeze it and ship it to another facility that thaws it and then packs it into whatever final form it is. But we just announced today that in China, we've just started production in a facility that is an inline production. So we're making the meat, finishing it and packaging it all in one place, which of course is critical to our long-term quest to bring the price down. But it's also going to be critical in a country like China, where we know price is such an important issue. So it is a high priority, and we are investing and acting against it like it is a high priority. And you're already seeing some instances, like if you look at Dunkin', where they have the Beyond Breakfast sandwich, they price that sandwich at parity with the pork sausage sandwich. And so we're not talking about something that is out of reach for people.
Well, I'm excited to try 3.0. I think it was Ali Bouzari that coined the term that has stuck with me for a while. I think when you wrote about an article for Wired, this idea of the uncanny valley of meat. And I think you guys are getting past that to a certain degree. This idea that okay, it's close, but it's 90% close. And so as a lifetime meat.
But here's what's neat. You don't, of course, we know meat is a proven winner. So let's just talk about the hamburger. We know that it has won approval in the marketplace. We don't have to match it. There's literally thousands of sensory notes in a hamburger. We don't have to match all of them to still deliver a satisfying culinary experience. So initially, when we were talking about the Beyond Burger, do we call it the Beyond Hamburger just because we said no, it's its own creature. It's not a creature. It's its own entity. And so the goal is to make something that tastes as delicious as a hamburger, but it doesn't have to replicate the hamburger, sort of sensory note for sensory note. And do you understand the nuance there?
Yeah. I totally get it. And I think they're delicious now, the current crop of burgers, right? I mean, and my kid, what's interesting is it's interesting that your son went vegetarian early, and my kids like Beyond better. They like the plant-based burgers better than the slaughtered meat version of it, which is really kind of surprising for me.
And they get it. They get it so much more clearly and cleanly than I think people of my generation in 5 years had a little more tortured a journey to get to a place. And the kid's just like, wait a minute, it's just so obvious.
Yeah, and they're values driven, right? Like my son is like, why
stakeholders in the planet?
My son's like, why kill an animal when I can have like a plant-based burger? So I think that's really
exactly well, and it was an easy answer 10 years ago because they say the animal burger is delicious and the plant-based one's not, and now the answer is different.
So there is still a lot of people who a part of their identity is eating meat, and they love the taste of meat, and so I think there's a big consumer education lift in front of us. I mean, I do, your competitor, you probably may know, we wrote an article at The Spoon. They launched this big ad campaign, Impossible, about we are meat. So I think that's an important thing, right? Like this big spend on advertising. So what are your thoughts?
Meat is a part of human evolution, right? I mean, literally communities evolved. I mean, the hunt was both the hunt and then the eating afterwards were community events. So meat has played a central role in human evolution and civilization, sort of community evolution. The important thing to recognize is we are serving meat at Beyond Meat. Like it's not, and our name was intentional. It's not, it is just a distinction of origin, but composition, from a composition perspective, our product is meat. It's, assembly of amino acids that form the proteins, lipid that forms the fat, mostly water, so it has all the same components. It's just how it's assembled. So I think we recognize that role that meat plays, and we're not trying to serve lentil salads and telling people you should enjoy that instead of, of course, it's fine if people have a lentil salad, but we're not trying to say lentil salad is as enjoyable, as convenient, as nutrient dense as a hamburger for a lot of people who just aren't going to buy that argument. I think it is, and it's one of the reasons at Beyond Meat we've really invested heavily in having athletes as ambassadors, because one of the knocks against the vegetarian food or community is these aren't people who they're willing to sacrifice their athletic performance. And what you're hearing from the world's best athletes is that actually plant-based nutrition gives them a competitive advantage. So we have to really look at and then lifestyle. We've just this week had a campaign on TikTok with a star of one of the most popular figures on TikTok. And there too, you want to be part of the cultural conversation. You don't want, I love the old school vegan folks, but they aren't the ones who are going to change mainstream culture folks to adopt. So
I think it's interesting that your position is we are meat. I think the incumbents, the lobbyist groups are not going to necessarily just agree with you and give in so easily, right? So can you talk? Yeah. And the National Cattlemen's Association is no pushover, right? Like it's a very strong lobbying group. So talk about that.
Clearly vested interest. Look, anytime an entrenched industry, and a large one, by the way, as I said, the largest in food, feels threatened, their natural response is to, constrain the competition. And it is a real threat, and you're still seeing labeling legislation being proposed. And in the short term, it is at the least it's frustrating and may even be challenging for us. In the long term, I'm confident that we have the consumer on our side, and I've seen that. And I know you've followed food as well, so I'll share with you a page from going back from my Honest Tea days when you had the GMO labeling controversy, where consumers wanted to have it labeled. If there was GMOs in the food, they wanted it labeled. And the big companies, surprise, surprise, were against that. But consumers wanted it. And it's never a good look for a large industry to try to constrain consumers' access to choice or to information. I have yet to see that work out well. It may protect someone in the short term, but in the long term, the consumers, especially in this age where people have access to information and they have access to empowerment and community empowerment, it's the consumers are going to win on this one.
Yeah, and transparency is always going to win, I think, in today's world. Talk a little bit. So, just kind of the last question on the politics side. I mean, I don't think meat is a culture war issue yet, but I think it's in danger of kind of moving that, because I've seen some kind of right wing politicians talk about how they won't eat plant-based burgers. They've mocked it to a certain degree. Do you think it's in danger of becoming a culture war issue?
I hope not, and I don't think so, because we're not. and this is one of the important aspects of tone that Beyond Meat and others have adopted, which is, this isn't about being self-righteous. This isn't about being pure. It's not about moving everyone to vegan diets. It is really about just having more occasions to eat plant-based protein. And so, from a health perspective, an environmental perspective, there's just so many reasons to move this way. And of course, as we said, the younger generation gets it. So I don't think, yes, you'll hear some you can call them meatheads, who are just going to say, don't. And of course, no one that I know is seriously talking about, banning, hamburgers or restricting the rights of meat industry, animal-based meat to grow. It's really to me the fight is actually just about allowing plant-based meat to be able to label their products truthfully. So I actually think there's going to be some extremist language there, but I think it's going to be lost on the consumer because I don't think the consumer is feeling that tension. They're just looking at health. I always say the best salesperson for plant-based protein is the doctor. And when someone goes for their annual checkup and they say, you have to eat less red meat. But of course, it's also what students are learning, either through social media or in universities. And we go to, haven't spoken at university in the past year, but even online. And this is just, I can't tell you. When I was in college, there wasn't even a major around food and sustainability, and I have since spoken to hundreds of students where that's a major.
Yeah, there's actually some few kind of food innovation disciplines and courses that I've been starting to see both on the plant-based side as well as the cultured side.
Yeah.
But I do want to ask you about
just one last point, Michael, is that the other thing is that there's a business opportunity on the plant-based side as well. So for farmers, a lot of the farmers who are part of the meat industry supply chain, they sell these commodity crops that are, razor thin margins, and it's a tough way to make a living. Versus, we've now helped a lot of farmers in the U.S. Switch over to growing peas and other crops where it's a value-added crop, and just on the economics of food, it's literally always better to be higher up in the food chain. Meaning, if you're growing a crop that's sold, that's fed to a cow, that cow is then fed to the person, that's going to be a lower value crop than if you grow a crop that's fed to a human. So we can help the farmers move up the food chain and sell with better margins.
How formalized is that, right? I mean, I wrote last week for our newsletter about this idea of helping actual dairy and cow farmers transition to plant-based. Yeah. And there are some organizations that are doing that. I know Miyoko is pushing that on Miyoko's Dairy. Yeah. But is that something that the industry, the plant-based industry is helping to kind of coalesce around?
I'm sure it's trying to support it, but there just isn't enough of an industry to do that in a organized way. We work with our suppliers, so we have a great supplier base in the Midwest, and so we work with them, and they did recently convert over a dairy operation into a milling operation. So, but it's not an organized movement. I think to claim it would be to overstate the organizational strength of the plant-based food companies. We're all collectively, so small relative to the meat industry, so we just aren't at that level yet.
You did mention earlier about how doctors may recommend moving to a plant-based diet for health reasons, but I mean, some would say that, and I think this was purposeful, this was strategic, that, Beyond Impossible aren't necessarily the most healthy. It's not as healthy as eating celery and just pure vegetables. Mm-hmm. And that was strategic, right? You guys wanted flavor. So talk about that journey and getting away to lower sodium, et cetera.
Yeah, no, you have to deliver on taste for sure. Otherwise you don't even get the chance. And even with, what is where we are now, there's still strong health advantages, certainly around cholesterol, certainly around saturated fat, but there's other elements in meat that are not in plant-based meat, not all of which appear on the nutritional label, and whether that is, hormones or other antibiotics or other TMAO, things that you just don't see on a label. But no question, it's all part of that iterative process. So as I said, with 3.0, we are going to be lowering the fat level, saturated fat level. Sodium is an issue we know we can address. We don't add sodium to the product when we formulate it. What happens is in the separation of the pea protein from the starch, there's sodium gets added. So for us, it's how do we take that step back and find a separation process that doesn't add the sodium in. So we're confident that's something that we'll be addressing as well.
I do want to talk about your new efforts with Plant Burger. I mean, I know we did an article this morning where Jen Marston with The Spoon interviewed Josh Tetrick and asked him about the future of restaurants and asked, does he see a world where, restaurants and chains even will move entirely away from slaughtered meat and towards plant-based? And I'm kind of guessing you're kind of trying to create the prototype with Plant Burger, right? Talk about that.
Yeah, well, to answer the first part, I don't think it's, there's going to be a world where all restaurants are moving away from animal-based meat, at least not in the next 20 years. But with Plant Burger, we did want to create a concept that was entirely plant-based and, of course, make sure it was delicious. And so it's been so fun because my co-founder in this one is Spike Mendelsohn, who's also a co-founder with Eat the Change, but he is a celebrity chef who actually had a burger restaurant that was not plant-based. So he knows a lot about making great tasting burgers, and so could we build this a plant-based concept? And what happened was I was at a panel with him a few years ago, and I snuck some Beyond Burgers under his chair because I was trying to sell him on the burgers, and I didn't know it, but his wife is vegan, and so he brought the burgers home, and she flipped when she tasted them, and all of a sudden, so he reached back out and said, we should build a business. Now, I was in the middle of Honest Tea and Beyond Meat, and I'm like, I don't want to say I was trying to get out of it. I said, look, I like the idea, but I just don't have the bandwidth or any experience in the restaurant industry. So rather than go out and launch a new concept, let's just go to Whole Foods, where obviously I have some strong relationships, and let's ask them if we can stand up a concept inside one of their stores. And so we did that in Silver Spring in 2019. And that we've now got 7 of those similar concepts, all housed within Whole Foods. And, I'm glad to say we weathered the pandemic, and now the business is just rebounding in a really exciting way. And yes, I'm sure many people who buy the product buy it because it's plant-based. But I'm willing to bet at least 30% buy it just because it's delicious burgers, and it is, and we have launched other products. It's not only Beyond Meat. We have a really fun mushroom-based chicken sandwich that we're the only ones who make because we found a unique ingredient there, and it's one of the other fun aspects to this business is that my son is heading up the marketing, and he's been so creative, and he was the one who came up with the term or the phrase "eat the change you wish to see in the world," and that inspired me, in this.
Started your other company. And by the way, I'm just curious if Seth Goldman walks around with plant-based burgers in his backpack and puts them under people's. Do you put them under people's chairs at conferences?
Well, I do wherever I go. So it used to be Honest Tea. I would always have a cooler of Honest Tea, and I'd bring that around, and then I had to double it and put in burgers and tea, and it was getting a little bulky. And now I'm happy to say with Eat the Change, we've got this mushroom jerky, and it is a much lighter and easier product to carry and doesn't need refrigeration. So yes, I always carry samples, and I know there's a lot of food entrepreneurs on listening in, and it is by far if there's one piece of advice is to always have your product with you, because you always have to be selling it. And the classic story we tell about Honest Tea, and this literally happened, was Barry went to a yoga retreat. And it just so happens that on the mat next to him was Oprah. And so
no way. That's hard to believe.
It's totally true. Yeah, this was a while. She was still Oprah, but she wasn't as Oprah as she is now. So this was 2001 or something. And,
that's still pretty Oprah.
It's still pretty Oprah, but yeah. And he said, "Oh, you got to try my tea." And then someone said to him, "Well, how did you know Oprah was going to be there?" He says, "Of course I didn't know Oprah was going to be there, but I always have my tea with me." And so the single biggest piece of advice is, walk around as if Oprah is going to be, on the yoga mat next to you, or the airplane seat next to you, or wherever you are, because you have to have what you can't do is say, "Oh, Oprah, I would love to send you some samples of tea. Let me get your address." And then, it gets sent into some huge warehouse, and some receptionist drinks it and never makes it to Oprah, So you've always got to have your product at hand, prepared the way you want. And of course, not only did Barry have his tea with him, it was chilled. So it was the perfect scenario. And so Oprah finishes a sweaty yoga routine and enjoys a bottle of Honest Tea. And within a year, we got a beautiful full-page write-up in O Magazine. So that's what can happen when you're, what is it called? Opportunity meets preparedness.
Yeah, that would have never happened. And by the way, I love the synchronicity of putting stuff under chairs like Oprah does anyway. That's kind of your modus operandi. And by the way, I love that you gave some advice to people who are food entrepreneurs, and some of the food entrepreneurs listening in. I do want to take some questions here in just a second, but tell us a little bit about your Eat the Change brand with your mushroom jerky.
Yeah, so here's what was fun. So Plant Burger was up and running, and we were selling a shiitake bacon on a burger. And so I said, I know a mushroom farmer I've known for more than a decade. Let's go visit. And we went and did this visit. And the first thing we saw out of it was that they had these yellow oyster mushrooms, which were beautiful, but they were the fruiting body of the mushroom they were just putting in the compost bin. I said, well, what's that? And she said, oh, well, you can actually take this home and make a poor man's crab cake, but we just don't have a market use for them. I said, well, let us take a bunch, which they had no problem with because it was basically waste. We brought them home. We were able to make them into what has become our crispy chicken fungi sandwich. And it's a beautiful chicken-like sandwich. And so then that got me thinking with Spike, well, what else can we do with mushrooms? And it turns out, especially with portobellos, which are sold in the grocery stores, they look so beautiful, those caps. But a lot of the mushrooms that grow don't fit that size perfectly. And so those don't make it to retail. And then the stems don't make it to retail. And we said, well, what can we do with those? So we worked with drying them out, and then we found a smokehouse that works with beef jerky, and we were able to impart a hickory smoke flavor along with Spike's recipes. And so we've just launched this line of 5 different varieties of mushroom jerky. And so Eat the Change is the brand, and we're, as I said, just getting started, but the vision is to create chef-crafted, planet-based food. And we've got all types of other innovative ideas, but it's always going to be nutrient-dense, and it's always going to be, really on the leading edge of climate-friendly. And mushrooms are an extremely environmentally efficient product. They grow literally 7 layers high inside, and then they still rely on soil, so you're still playing an important role in capturing carbon and nourishing the earth and nourishing people as well. Mushrooms also, I'm sure, as you know, are having a moment from a health and culinary perspective. So partially, I think people are seeking out immunity-associated, or attributes, and mushrooms fit that bill. So it's just been so fun to launch this new business, and the other thing I'll just mention, and part of it is we, consistent with our mission in this Eat the Change, we have this challenge going on for 21 days here in April, where we're encouraging people to take on every day a nudge, an extra step toward a planet-friendly diet. So yesterday it was to eat 12 different fruits and vegetables, and over the weekend it was to have something organic that you wouldn't normally buy organic, or shift to plant-based dairy. So it's been a lot of fun.
So I do want to take questions from the audience. So if you want to come up on stage and ask Seth the question, start raising your hands. But Seth, you helped take Beyond public. They were one of the maybe the first of the kind of the new generation of plant-based companies to go public. So you've thought a lot, and you've helped them raise money. If you look at the current market, right, the funding and the amounts being raised are kind of eye-popping. So I'm kind of curious to get your thoughts on this. Is this something that we're seeing? Are we seeing kind of a bubble with regards to plant-based valuations, or is this something that's just it's long overdue?
Yeah. So first, I should just make some disclaimer about I'm not offering market advice and
Sure.
whatever. Yeah. But I think it's different. These are not just you're not just asking people to invest in legacy meat businesses. I think so. There is a recognition that this is where society and the consumer is headed, and so it was really striking when we did the roadshow for the IPO. I had a few big takeaways. The first was there hadn't been any public, there hadn't been any food IPOs in the past 10 years. The years prior to us, it had only been 5 in the prior 10 years. none of which had really sort of been basically all the companies that had got acquired. So they weren't really standalone companies. The other thing that was really striking, and I would go into these meetings and I would meet people who are like the ESG, the socially responsible investment officer, and they'd be managing, $5 billion, and I would say, well, what are you investing in? Because in the publicly traded, consumer products, there just aren't companies that, there's a company, you say, well, they have a, one plant-based part of their product line, but there were very few companies where there was a pure play around ESG, and so there was clearly an appetite for that. So I think it is, and you look at whether it's businesses like Tesla, where they sort of say this is where consumers are headed. That's why there's so much eagerness to invest in that space, in that direction. But it's also a desire to invest in a way that's aligned with beliefs. And so I'm sure you've heard stories of whether it's students who want and this is by no means, the largest investors in Beyond Meat are large institutional investors, so I don't want to imply that it's a bunch of, high school or college graduates, putting, shares at a time. I'm sure there's some of that, but it is more about where people, partially when they invest, sometimes they want to invest where they want to see society headed, as opposed to necessarily where it is.
I didn't know that stat about no public companies really sticking, 5 food companies going public and none really sticking around. That's actually a shocking statistic.
Yeah, so just you had Annie's, they got bought by General Mills. You had the Skinny Pop, which was part of, they got bought by Hershey. So, there just hadn't been any IPOs that really stuck.
Interesting. Hey, well, I want to welcome Peter Chow up on stage. Peter, you have a question for Seth?
Yeah, thanks. First, I'd say it's pretty ironic if you had Oprah repping Beyond Meat, just based on the history of that.
Well, this was Honest Tea. So,
but also for the Beyond Meat, yeah.
I don't think she's done much with Beyond Meat, actually, to be honest. And we've had others like Martha Stewart, but
yeah. So my question though is on this idea of sustainability, and you'd say like companies are constantly listening to what consumers want, but as it comes to sustainability, how do we give consumers like the right language to say what they want in terms of sustainability so that businesses will understand it?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because so often they'll talk about sustainability, but it's from the place where they are. So I won't name any names, but you can look at an existing meat company and they'll talk about we're trying to reduce our water footprint or reduce our energy footprint. And I commend them for taking those steps, but they are by definition, if they are an animal-based meat company, they're using, we've done the life cycle analysis with the Beyond Burger where they're using 99% times more water. So, okay, it's good if they're using less water, but percentage tweaks aren't nearly as meaningful as basically those companies folding up the tent and going home, or just, evolving their business to a different model. So, it is hard. There is not one single metric that consumers have. But life cycle analyses that are peer reviewed are important, and I understand most consumers don't have the time or bandwidth to read them, but they are helpful. And when a company has done a life cycle analysis, like we have at Beyond Meat, we put it on our website, and you make that terminology available to people. So. And there are now other sources. The one source that I have always looked to, found very helpful is Drawdown. It's called drawdown.org, and it is a list of 80 solutions to actually cool the planet. And so when they start talking about whether it's food waste or plant-based diets, those are good objective arbiters of facts.
So I guess another, in terms of the language though, would you agree that their carbon labels on a product would incentivize marginal benefits? Because I think what gets lost is that consumers can choose, and you as a company would optimize for marginal differences in fat and sugar and salt because the consumers are actually valuing it, and that.
Yeah.
So for a carbon label, it would incentivize marginal changes that across the food system would impart a large movement, as opposed to just not knowing what the consumers want.
It's a neat idea. I think the challenge is the consumer doesn't currently have any yardstick by which to go by. So that's where it just gets harder to quantify it. And I guess you could say, well, you got to start somewhere, which you do. But it just, you could put on a package, we're using this much carbon, and if people don't know what to compare it to, then it's hard. And that's, going back to when the first nutritional panels came out, that's why they were so important, is because they started now to standardize the units and the buckets. So in the beverage space, for example, it was always against an 8-ounce serving. And you could then literally look at a bottle of Honest Tea against a bottle of Arizona iced tea, and you know exactly how to compare them. And consumers don't yet have those standardized ability to compare carbon footprints.
Thanks, Peter. Seth, I have a question. One of the things that Beyond's always made a point of pushing out there is you guys are non-GMO.
Yes.
And so I think I'm curious what your stance is around things like gene editing and some of these interesting and innovative technologies that, maybe in the US are not technically classified as GMO, but like in Europe, they certainly are. What are your thoughts?
So first, going back to my days with Honest Tea, where we were the first to sell organic bottled tea, I am a strong believer, that there's a lot nature can do on its own. And I actually think a lot of the science and GMO and agriculture isn't really about, a lot of the excuses are, well, it helps elevate yields. In a sense, what GMOs often are a way for the chemical herbicides and pesticides to be able to market their products as, Roundup ready crops and that kind of thing. So I don't think I'm confident the world can be fed without relying on GMOs, and I don't buy the argument that they're needed for that. I do think there's some interesting opportunities with like CRISPR and gene editing. So that to me, that's not GMO in the same way. I think one other hesitation I have around GMOs is going back, and this is important for the plant-based industry as a whole. We have to rely on transparency. It's critical. We're selling a product consumers don't necessarily know as much about, and I think it's really important that every ingredient be something they can understand. That they sort of can get their heads around, and we play into the hands of there is an organization called the Center for Consumer Freedom where they'll try to put labels on fake meat, plant-based meat, and talk about it being super processed and spreading a lot of falsehoods. But so I'm totally fine with non-GMO approaches to using science to enhance what agriculture can do. But I personally avoid GMO ingredients, and I don't believe they're needed to feed the world both from a health and sustainable perspective.
That's great. And certainly I think a lot of folks, particularly the American viewpoint, is that CRISPR and gene editing isn't necessarily GMO.
Yeah,
you're not inserting non-novel DNA into like food. So, it's a pretty important tool in the toolbox, right?
Absolutely.
Around agriculture, et cetera. I do want to welcome Chef Lisa on stage. Hey, Chef, how are you doing?
I'm great. Hi, Mike. Thanks so much. Seth, it's great to meet you today.
Hi.
I have to say that your products got my friends and I through the early days of the pandemic because everyone was either gluten-free or vegan. So I just cooked everything gluten-free and vegan.
That's great.
So I made every dish.
Yeah, and this whole pandemic, and obviously none of us would wish to do it again, but I think it it created an opportunity for people to reevaluate a lot of their choices they've been making.
Completely. I mean, I made everything out of Beyond Meat. It was amazing.
Yeah.
So my question, I sort of two questions. One is that, so I'm launching a line of sauces and dressings, plant-based. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, what certifications do you think are most important to consumers today? So looking more in the Beyond Meat category, plant-based sauce or dressing. That's consumer.
Yeah, so it's interesting because even with Beyond Meat jerky, Eat the Change with our jerky, obviously we put a vegan label on it, and we have done the testing to make sure there's no meat DNA in there. So I think, if it is plant-based, you do want to be able to do it. And there are different seals, but I think for the most part, if people look at the ingredients, they'll be able to understand, assuming you don't have any animal-based products, that they'll understand it's vegan. I actually think if you're not relying on, if all of your ingredients are widely available, I always encourage people to go for organic. I think there's certainly nothing about organic that on its own, speaks to plant-based, but it does speak to the health of the planet. And so usually when someone's thinking plant-based, they are someone who's got that lens of understanding it's better for the planet. And organic takes it up that extra notch, both for quality as well as environmental rigorousness. So I'm a big fan and supporter of the organic seal. When possible, at Honest Tea, we were also the first to use fair trade in our sourcing, so the first fair trade bottled tea. And that, depending on, obviously, for certain ingredients, that's relevant. Obviously, for others, it's not. And then, it is interesting around, clearly gluten-free has a lot of, a strong but narrow set of people. So when it's if it's not hard and it doesn't mean sacrificing, I do think there's a benefit to getting that certification. I always a little cautious, and I think for the line of products you're outlining, I think it's fine. I always get a little nervous when I see a gluten-free vegan snack because I often, in my mind and in my palate, taste a trade-off.
I was funny, and I have one more question.
Sure.
What are the open spaces that you're seeing in the plant-based CPG world?
Yeah, so I would say that cheese is still open. There are some brands that are getting better, but I still think that's space to capture. And and even on yogurt, there are plant-based yogurts, and I am still. What do you call it? I'm not loyal to one brand on yogurt because as soon as a better one comes out, I'm willing to try it. And I consume yogurt, but I'm never thrilled with my options. So I think that's a space. I'd say dairy is pretty congested. I would not encourage going there. We obviously believe there's an opportunity in jerky, and so meat snacks is what we're, even though ours is straight up mushroom. It's not meant to replicate meat, but we just think the jerky occasion is one where there's an opportunity for people to shift away from animal-based protein. So those to me are some of the more prevalent ones. And look, obviously on egg, I do think that's a growing space. There's a few brands that are getting some real traction, but we still like the egg occasion, my family. And so, there's going to be room and opportunity for more than one player there.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Good luck.
That's such a great question that Lisa asked. Thank you, Lisa, about white space opportunities. And I think the snacking, like the concentrated protein snacking I think that's what jerky is to me. Like it's this kind of small concentrated protein.
Yep.
that you can get. And I think that's interesting that you see that as an opportunity. On the cheese side, I just got my shipment of grounded foods, which is they're making hemp and cauliflower based cheese. So I'm super excited. But I agree with you on the cheese side. That's an interesting space as well. So I'm looking forward to trying that. I'd be curious, kind of looking towards other types of technologies. You mentioned eggs. I'm looking at Clara Foods is doing with their precision fermentation based egg replacement. So do you see are you excited about those types of like technologies, precision fermentation?
Sure. Let me, one other area I should just mention for at least because my wife, on the seafood front as well, and obviously with Seaspiracy being this big sensation on Netflix, I think there's an appetite. My wife and I we drove 40 minutes this weekend because we heard there was a plant-based salmon, plant-based lox substitute. And we drove up to Olney, Maryland, and they didn't have it. So I think those are, maybe not quite as big a market opportunity, but for someone who could do those well, I do think those are spaces where there'll be demand. And ironically, on our way home, we stopped by. There's a great restaurant up in that area called Vegetable Garden. They used to have an amazing plant-based shrimp. And I grew up, when I grew up, we had a kosher home, so I never got to taste the real shrimp. But that plant-based shrimp was as good as anything. It was certainly delicious. And unfortunately, they were out of that as well. But I think those are some neat opportunities. In terms of the replication, I do think there's opportunity there. I think there's going to be a labeling. You think the plant-based folks have a labeling challenge? I can guarantee you the cell replicating people are going to have an even bigger challenge, and the industry is going to push back even more forcefully. Because I was on a panel. This was at the Good Food Institute 2 years ago now, where someone was saying, look, if a product is made from chicken cells, we can just call it chicken. We don't have to say that it's cultured or made in replicated in a lab. And I'm like, oh, good luck with that. I don't buy that. So I do think there's going to be some labeling issues. I think that I also think the science still is pretty far away before these products can get scaled and cost competitive. And then I would just say, while they're still working on that, we are out there building the business and building the brand. So, and continually iterating and improving. So let's say we're at 6.0 by the time those products come to market. It's not like it's going to everything's going to just roll over and for them to all take the opportunity. So, obviously we've made our bet around replicating meat from plants. But I do think there'll be some opportunities in the cultured space.
Great. Elizabeth, welcome to stage. You have a question for Seth?
Hi there, Seth. Nice to see you again.
Hi.
Looking forward to our talk on May 4th. I had a quick question for you. So Burger King came out and said, at least for the UK, that it was going to go 50-50 plant-based by 2030. And I wondered if you could talk about the future of fast food, if you will, in the United States. Of course, there's Eat the Change. There are a couple other plant-based chains. And when do you think that you might see, let's say, McDonald's go 50-50 of a plant-based menu?
Well, it's all going to depend on how the consumers respond. I mean, as you know, Elizabeth, both McDonald's and Yum Brands, which is KFC, Taco Bell, and Pizza Hut, all committed to, or all have a partnership with Beyond Meat. So we do expect to see some activity from all those chains, and that's an exciting step. And and these chains are extremely influential and impactful. We saw it with Honest Tea when we brought Honest Kids to McDonald's and they rolled it out. They sold, literally more than 100 million units just in the first year, and so over 200 million units, in fact. So they really can move the needle. But it's all going to depend on the consumer response, and if consumers don't like the product or it's not executed well, there's these guys. I mean, they're partners. I respect them all, but the market dictates what they bring, and that's going to be the case with these as well. So I certainly hope to see it grow to 50-50, but it's going to all depend on how consumers respond to it. But the good news is, I do think we're within 18 months, 2 years, you're going to see every major chain offering plant-based offerings in the main part of the menu. It's not the turn to the last page of the menu, or sort of, if you know a special code you can get a plant-based product. It's going to be right on the main part of the menu, and you'll be able to have these plant-based products. So that'll be an exciting moment.
Let me, if you don't mind, Michael, ask the same sort of question in a slightly different way. I'm wondering, as we're getting quotes or studies coming out saying that, okay, by 2035, potentially the market is going to be worth $290 billion. That study just recently came out from Blue Horizons Group and Boston Consulting. Is fast food going to be the leader in that?
It'll certainly be a contributor. What we've sort of, our shorthand, and we talked about this even going back to our road show, is we looked at dairy, where dairy is 13%, plant-based dairy is 13% of that category, and we thought plant-based meat had the potential to get, to that level within 10 years. But the reason fast food is so important is because it is the best sampling opportunity we have. If someone walks into a McDonald's and they can choose basically a quarter pounder with cheese or a quarter Beyond Burger, if that's the McPlant as they would call it, and they're the same price point and the same thing, and it's very easy to just try to try it. So you get this trial there. And so it recruits people in a way that if we were to try to replicate that sort of sampling experience, it would be much harder to do. We'd have to set up tables all around the country and cook burgers on our own and all that. And so they just convey a great deal of credibility because everybody knows these chains are all about, they want to sell what tastes delicious, and they have to do it at scale. And consistently, and so they do have a high bar around quality. Even though people, may not think it's healthy, they are rigorously screening what they put on their menu. So it does add a measure of a halo of credibility.
Sure, and the accessibility is fantastic.
Absolutely, and price accessibility as well. 100%. So it's distribution and accessibility as well. You're right.
Yeah. Thank you, Seth.
Sure.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Hey, Meryl, you get the last question for Seth. Welcome to the stage.
Hi, I love doing that. Thank you. Thanks. Nice to meet you, Seth. I think our paths have crossed. But my question really is, if we're talking about scale and we're talking about price with plant and cell-based opportunities, obviously production, manufacturing are a big piece of this. What are you seeing, not only the opportunities, but are we seeing, because of this connection of bringing to market through the fast food world, et cetera, opportunities for conversion of plants, new plants? Like, what are the need states going forward to really not only drive up production, but most importantly, drive down cost?
Yeah. So it is really all a question of scale. I mean, the on paper, it's so obvious that plant-based has to cost less than animal-based because we are using that 99% less water, 93% less land. We're not raising a cow over 18 months. We're not feeding it. We're not cleaning up after it. We're not giving it all the other inputs, medicines and things it needs. And then and we're so just on the math on it's very straightforward. It's really just a matter of getting the crops scaled to grow. And so, peas are the first crop or the main crop we're using, but it certainly won't be the only crop we will rely on or the whole plant-based protein world will rely on. So what you're already seeing now is both more crops being grown and more conversion facilities. And what the conversion facility is the one that takes the peas and separates the starch and the protein. And by the way, the starch is not a waste product. In fact, the irony of this whole way this evolved is that the protein was the waste product. The starch, peas were primarily grown. The starch was taken out to make cellophane noodles, sold primarily in Asia. So it's just an interesting way that has evolved. But it is just more crops needing to be planted, more conversion facilities being set up around the world, and I'm confident, as we've said, within 5 years we will be underpricing animal-based meat in more than one category.
And so I do want to thank you, Seth, and I want to keep mindful of time. We're over an hour. I generally try to keep these pretty tight. So Seth, you're busy running companies and doing lots of important things. So everyone who's up on stage, if you want to give Seth a quick round of applause, please do so. And Seth, as always, I do appreciate your thoughtful time, and thank you for educating us a little bit today.
It was really fun to talk with you, and always happy to, I love this community. I love the moment of change we're all in, and hope that others can get involved.
Great. All right. Well, as always, thank you, Seth, and thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we'll talk to everyone soon.
Bye,
everyone. Bye, guys.